The morning rush at Miller's Diner always started the same way. The old bell above the door gave a weak jingle every time someone walked in, and the smell of frying bacon hung heavy in the air. Coffee cups clinked, plates scraped, and the hum of quiet conversation filled the room. It was the kind of place where people came not because the food was special, but because it felt like home. Behind the counter, a woman moved with quiet focus. Her name was Elena, and she had worked at Miller's for almost 10 years. She wore a faded blue apron with a tiny patch stitched near the pocket that said, "Be kind." It was something she had sewn on herself after her mother passed away. Every morning, she tied her hair up, slipped a pencil behind her ear, and started her shift long before the sun was fully up. She knew every regular by name and order. Mr. Thompson wanted his eggs over easy. The truck driver named Ronnie wanted black coffee. And the two older women by the window always split one stack of pancakes because calories count more after 60, as they like to say. Elena smiled at all of them. She had learned how to smile even when her feet ached and her back hurt, even when she wished she could be anywhere else. The diner's owner, Frank, stood at the register, counting the bills in the till. He was a large man with a gray beard and a heart that was even bigger. He had given Elena the job when she was 20, desperate for work after her mother got sick. "You got a good head and a kind heart," he'd said back then. "That's all I need." Now she was almost 30, still behind the same counter. Between orders, Elena liked to doodle on the back of old receipts or napkins. She never really thought much of it. It was just something she did to keep her hands busy when the place got quiet. Sometimes it was a sketch of the coffee pot, sometimes of the neon open sign that buzzed faintly in the window. She had been drawing for as long as she could remember, though she rarely showed anyone her work. One slow afternoon, when the lunch rush had ended and the diner felt sleepy under the hum of ceiling fans, a middle-aged man sat down at the counter. He wore a worn-out jacket and looked like he'd been driving for hours. Elena handed him a menu with a polite smile. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Strong as you've got." While he waited, Elena stood near the register, idly sketching the outline of the counter and stools on a napkin. The man noticed her pencil moving quickly. "You an artist or something?" he asked. Elena laughed softly. "Hardly, just passing time." He reached for the napkin before she could crumple it. "Well, that's more than passing time." "That's good, really good." Elena blushed and shrugged. "Just a hobby." He nodded but kept looking at the napkin like it was something worth framing. "You ever think about doing more with it?" She didn't answer right away. She just poured his coffee, added a refill for another customer, and said quietly, "Not really. Life kinda got in the way." The man gave a knowing smile but didn't push. When he left, he tucked the napkin carefully into his coat pocket. That small moment stayed with Elena longer than she expected. That night after closing, she sat in the back booth and looked through her sketchbook, pages filled with faces of people who had sat at that counter over the years. There was the tired nurse who came in after her shift, the young couple who always argued then made up over pancakes, the little boy who spilled chocolate milk every single Saturday. Each face had a story, and somehow she had caught it with her pencil. She wondered if maybe the man was right. Maybe there was something more she could do. But then the thought faded, replaced by the usual voice in her head. "You're too old. Too busy, too late." The next morning came too early. Her alarm buzzed at 4:30 and she dragged herself out of bed. The small apartment she rented above the hardware store was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. She brewed instant coffee, looked out at the still dark street, and got ready for another day. By 6, she was back at the diner, apron tied tight, hairpin back. "Morning, sunshine," Frank called as she walked in. "You're too cheerful for this hour," she said, trying to hide a yawn. "Someone's gotta be," he replied with a grin. "Oh, by the way, the pie delivery came early. You mind setting them out?" She nodded and went to work. Cherry, apple, pecan. She arranged each one carefully in the glass case near the register. It wasn't art, but it was something neat, something small she could control in a messy world. As the day went on, the diner filled again. Locals, travelers, and a few familiar faces. Elena moved gracefully through it all, her rhythm as natural as breathing. She knew just when to refill a cup, how to listen without prying, and how to smile in a way that made people feel seen. Her coworker, Mara, leaned against the counter during a short lull. "You should seriously post your drawings online," she said. Elena looked up from her order pad. Oh, please. No one wants to see napkin doodles. I'm serious, Mara said. You've got talent. Half the stuff that goes viral online isn't even half as good as what you do. Elena laughed but shook her head. I wouldn't even know where to start. Start by believing you're good enough, Mara replied softly. That line hit Elena harder than she expected. She smiled weakly and turned away, pretending to wipe the counter. Later that day, during her break, she sat at the far end of the diner with a cup of coffee and her sketchbook. Outside, the sky was gray, promising rain. She flipped through old pages again, this time studying them more carefully. Each drawing told a quiet story. Stories she hadn't realized she'd captured until now. The way someone's shoulders slumped after a long day, the curve of a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, little truths of everyday life. Frank walked over and looked down at the pages. You still drawing, huh? Yeah, she said, a little embarrassed. Just keeps me sane, I guess, he nodded. You ever think about showing these somewhere? I've got that empty wall by the restroom. You could hang a few there, she laughed. Right next to the restroom. Real classy. Hey, art belongs to the people, he said with a wink. Thanks, but I don't think anyone comes here for art, she replied. Maybe not, Frank said, but maybe they'll start. After he walked away, Elena couldn't help but smile. Maybe she'd hang one or two just for fun. That night, she stayed late after closing, choosing a few sketches to tape near the counter. A drawing of the diner's front door, another of a steaming cup of coffee, and one of Frank laughing behind the register. It felt silly but somehow right. The next morning, a group of high school kids came in before class. One of them pointed at the sketches and said, Whoa, who did those? Elena did, Mara said proudly. The kids leaned in to look. These are awesome, one of them said. You could totally sell prints of these. Elena felt her cheeks warm. She smiled but quickly changed the subject, pouring them orange juice and taking their order. Still, inside she felt a small flicker of pride. As the weeks went by, more people noticed the drawings. Some asked if she did portraits, others asked if she'd ever studied art. She always gave the same answer. A little, a long time ago. The truth was, years back, she had attended art school for a semester before her mother fell ill. When the hospital bills came, she left school to take care of her and started working full-time at the diner. After her mother passed, she never went back. Life had taken over, but every time she drew, it felt like touching that lost part of herself again. The part that once dreamed of gallery walls and sketchbooks full of stories. One particularly slow evening, just before closing, Elena sat alone at the counter, sketching the reflection of the neon sign in the diner window. The rain outside made the glass shimmer, and for a moment she felt peaceful. Frank came up behind her quietly. That's beautiful, he said. She looked up, surprised. Thanks. It's just the window. Yeah, but you see it different than the rest of us, he said. You see something worth looking at. She didn't know how to answer that. When she got home that night, she pulled out an old box from her closet. Inside were her art supplies from school. Pencils, charcoal sticks, and a few half-finished canvases. She hadn't opened it in years. She sat there for a long time, staring at the colors and remembering the feeling of believing in herself. The next morning, as the sun rose, Elena took a deep breath before heading to work. Something in her had shifted, not enough to change everything, but enough to notice. She smiled a little wider that day. When the man from before, the one who had taken her napkin drawing, came back through the door, she felt a spark of surprise. He smiled at her. Hey, remember me? Of course, she said, laughing. Back for the coffee? And the art, he said, pointing to the sketches on the wall. You've got talent, Elena. I wasn't kidding last time. She laughed again, but it was softer this time, less defensive. Thanks, I'm still just figuring things out. Keep figuring, he said. You've got something special. After he left, she looked at the napkin dispenser by the counter and smiled. Maybe the world was bigger than she thought. Maybe her life behind the counter wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was just the beginning. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the diner window, casting soft gold light across her sketches. The bell jingled again as a new customer entered, and Elena picked up her notepad, ready to serve, to smile, to draw, and maybe, just maybe, to dream again. The next few weeks passed quietly at Miller's diner, but something in the air had changed. Elena didn't talk about it out loud, but inside she felt a small growing spark she hadn't felt in years. Her sketches on the wall drew more attention than she ever expected. Some customers pointed them out while waiting for their food. Others asked if she sold them. One woman even wanted to buy the drawing of the coffee pot. Elena laughed and said, "It's just pencil on paper. It'll smudge if you touch it." But the woman didn't seem to care. She left a $10 bill on the counter and said, "Then don't touch it. Frame it." That night, Elena taped the bill inside her sketchbook, not for the money, but as a reminder that maybe what she did mattered to someone else. Still, life didn't slow down. The diner stayed busy, especially on weekends, and bills kept showing up at her apartment door like they always did. She still worked double shifts sometimes when a coworker called out, still carried trays until her shoulders ached. But now, every time she had a quiet moment, she reached for her pencil. One rainy afternoon, Mara came in on her day off, hair wet from the storm, and sat at the counter. "Do you ever think about sharing your art online?" she asked again, sipping hot chocolate. Elena shook her head. "No one's interested in diner sketches. People like fancy city art, not napkin drawings." "That's not true," Mara said. "People love stories. You've got one. They'd connect to it." Elena smiled but didn't answer. She didn't want to admit she'd actually been thinking about it. A few nights ago, she'd stayed up late scrolling through social media, looking at other artists' pages. Some had thousands of followers, others only a few dozen, but they all seemed brave. They shared their work with no promise anyone would care. She wasn't sure she was that brave yet. Later that night, after her shift ended, she walked home through the light drizzle, her sketchbook tucked safely in her bag. Her apartment smelled faintly of rain and old coffee. She sat at her small kitchen table, turned on the soft lamp beside her, and opened her sketchbook. Page after page was filled with moments from the diner. Smiles, hands, steam rising from cups, rain on windows. Each one told a story she hadn't spoken aloud. She stared at them, feeling both proud and scared. What if she did share them? What if no one cared? The next morning, she decided to take a small step. She borrowed Mara's help and made a simple social media account under the name Sketches. From the counter, Mara took a few pictures of her drawings while Elena blushed and laughed nervously. "This feels silly," Elena said. "Trust me," Mara replied, tapping the upload button. "People love real things. And you, my friend, are real." The first post went up with a short caption, "I work at a diner. These are the people I see every day." Then they waited. At first, nothing happened. A few likes, one comment from Mara saying "proud of you," and then silence. But by the next morning, there were a few dozen more likes. Then a few hundred. Then a message from someone asking if they could feature her sketches on their small art blog. Elena nearly dropped her phone when she read it. She called Mara right away. "You won't believe this," she said breathlessly. "Someone wants to write about the drawings." Mara laughed through the phone. "See, told you." Elena didn't tell Frank right away. She didn't want to jinx it. But when the article went up a few days later, the diner suddenly got busier. People came in not just for the pancakes, but to meet the waitress artist. Frank found out when a young couple asked if they could take a picture with her. He crossed his arms and grinned. "So that's why we've got all these new faces. You've gone famous on me." Elena laughed nervously. "Hardly famous." "Well, if this keeps up, I might have to start charging an art viewing fee," he teased, but truthfully, he looked proud. The next few weeks were strange. The diner still ran as usual. The coffee still brewed. The bell still rang. But Elena's life started to feel different. She was still serving food and cleaning tables, but now people recognized her from the article. Some left her notes with their tips, thanking her for showing beauty in everyday life. Others shared stories about their own forgotten dreams. It touched her deeply. One night after closing, she sat alone in the diner. The neon sign outside flickered softly, casting pink light across the counter. She opened her sketchbook and began drawing again, this time a self-portrait. Not perfect, not polished, just her in her apron, tired but hopeful. She had almost finished when she heard a voice behind her. "That's really something," Frank said, wiping his hands on a towel. She turned and smiled. "You scared me. Sorry," he said. "You staying late again?" "Yeah, I just wanted to finish this one." Frank leaned against the counter, studying the page. You ever think about what's next? She frowned. Next? Yeah, he said. Seems like the world's starting to notice you. Maybe it's time to notice yourself too. Elena looked down at the drawing. I don't know. This place, it's safe. It's all I've ever known. I get that, Frank said. But safety and happiness aren't always the same thing. She didn't answer. She just stared at the lines on the page, her own face looking back at her, and felt the weight of his words. That night, she walked home under the clear sky. The rain had stopped hours ago and the streets glistened under the streetlights. She thought about her mother, about how proud she would have been. Her mother had always said, "You see the world different. Elena, don't ever lose that." Maybe she hadn't lost it. Maybe she'd just buried it under long shifts and quiet fears. Over the next few days, her account kept growing. She started sharing not just drawings, but small stories about the people she drew. Nothing personal, just tiny glimpses of human life. The man who always left exactly $1 tip, the old couple who held hands even while eating breakfast, the teenage girl who studied in the corner booth after school. People loved it. Comments poured in, saying her sketches made them cry or smile, or remember someone they missed. It was overwhelming in the best way. Then one evening, a man walked into the diner with a camera hanging around his neck. He ordered coffee and pie, then asked, "Are you Elena?" She nodded cautiously. "Yes." "I'm a journalist," he said, showing his badge. "I saw your work online and wondered if I could talk to you about it, for a local feature." Elena blinked, unsure. "A feature on me?" "Yeah," he said. "Your story's inspiring, art, work, life. People love that kind of thing. Just a short piece, maybe a few photos." She hesitated, but finally agreed. They talked between customers, her wiping counters while answering his questions. He asked how long she'd been drawing, what inspired her, and why she chose to stay at the diner. "I guess it's the people," she said. "Everyone who comes here has a story. I just try to catch it," he smiled. "You do that well." By the end of the week, the article was published under the headline, "The Artist Behind the Counter." It spread faster than she imagined. People from other towns started visiting, just to see her sketches in person. Messages flooded her inbox. Some from other artists, others from strangers thanking her for reminding them that dreams don't have expiration dates. Elena felt both amazed and scared. She wasn't used to attention. For so long, she'd been invisible, the woman who refilled coffee and smiled politely. Now people wanted to know her, to see her work. One evening, she stood outside the diner after closing, watching the sunset fade behind the hills. Frank came out with a rag over his shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said. "Real good," she smiled softly. "Thanks. It still doesn't feel real." "It's real," he said. "And it's just the start." They stood there quietly for a while, the sounds of distant traffic filling the air. Elena thought about what just the start really meant. Was she supposed to leave the diner someday? Could she? She didn't know yet. But she knew one thing. She was no longer hiding behind the counter. That night, as she locked the door and turned off the lights, she caught her reflection in the diner's front window. For the first time in years, she didn't just see a waitress. She saw an artist, one who still had stories to tell and maybe even bigger ones waiting ahead. As she walked home, the quiet street seemed brighter somehow. She felt lighter, almost as if she were carrying not her past but her future. Inside her small apartment, she placed her sketchbook on the table, opened it to a blank page, and began to draw again. This time she sketched the diner, not from the outside, but from the inside looking out where she always stood. The bell above the door, the glow of the neon sign, the counter that held 1,000 stories, and just beneath it, she wrote 3 simple words, "More to come." Days at the diner started to blur together again, but now there was something new in the rhythm of it all. The same bell rang above the door, the same hiss came from the coffee pot, and the same chatter filled the booths. Yet it all felt different. People weren't just coming in for food anymore. Some came in holding phones, showing the article that had gone viral. Others came with small notebooks asking for her autograph, which always made her laugh awkwardly. Elena had never been the center of attention before. For years she had been just another face behind the counter, blending into the background. Now customers wanted to take pictures with her sketches in the background. A few even brought their own sketchbooks, saying she had inspired them to draw again. It was strange but heartwarming. She still worked just as hard, still carried trays, and still cleaned up spilled syrup with the same patience she always had. But inside something had shifted. She had started to believe little by little that maybe she was more than just a waitress. Frank noticed the difference too. He watched her from the register one morning as she served coffee to a group of tourists who had driven from another town just to meet the diner artist. When they left, he shook his head with a grin. "You know, you could charge people for this," he said jokingly. Elena smiled. "I'd rather they just enjoy the food." "You could be anywhere now," he said quietly. "But you're still here. You sure about that?" She looked around the diner. The booths, the faces, the light coming in through the front window. "Yeah," she said softly. "This place is home." He nodded but didn't say more. He knew there was more inside her than even she realized. Later that week, Elena got a message in her inbox from an art gallery 2 towns over. The message was polite and short. They'd seen her feature online and wanted to know if she'd be interested in displaying her work at a small community exhibit. She reread the message at least 10 times. Her hands trembled slightly. It felt unreal. A gallery? Her drawings were mostly done on napkins and cheap paper. How could those hang next to real art? That night she called Mara and read the message out loud. Mara nearly screamed through the phone. "You have to do it. You can't say no." "I don't even have proper supplies," Elena said nervously. "Everything I draw is on scraps. It's not professional." "Who cares?" Mara said. "That's what makes it real. It's your story. People love that." Elena didn't answer right away. She stared at the message again, feeling a mix of fear and hope. After she hung up, she sat on her bed with her old sketchbook open. The pages were full of life, smudges, fingerprints, and lines that weren't always perfect. But maybe that was the point. Maybe perfection wasn't what people saw in her work. Maybe they saw the truth. The next morning, she replied to the gallery's message with a simple, "Yes, I'd be honored." The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions. Between shifts at the diner, she worked late into the night choosing which drawings to display. Frank let her use the storage room in the back as her workspace. He brought her old frames from a thrift store and helped hang the pieces so she could see what they looked like together. "You sure these old things belong in a gallery?" she asked one night, half joking. "Absolutely," he said. "They belong wherever people can feel something when they look at them." "That's art, isn't it?" She smiled. "I guess it is." When the day of the exhibit finally came, Elena almost didn't go. Her nerves were so bad she could barely eat breakfast. She had never been to a gallery before, let alone had her own work displayed in one. Mara met her outside the small building with a big grin. "You look like you're about to run away." "I might," Elena said, laughing nervously. "Not today you won't," Mara said, looping her arm through Elena's and leading her inside. The gallery was cozy and filled with soft music. Her sketches hung neatly on one wall, each framed and labeled. A small sign read, "Sketches from the Counter by Elena." Elena froze when she saw it. It didn't feel real. Her work, her name, right there on the wall. People stood in front of her drawings, talking quietly, smiling. One woman pointed at a sketch of a truck driver sipping coffee and said, "There's something so peaceful about this." You can tell she really saw him. Elena turned away quickly, tears stinging her eyes. She wasn't used to people seeing her heart laid out like that. A man approached her with a gentle smile. "You're the artist, right? These are beautiful. It's rare to see work that feels so alive." "Thank you," she said softly, not sure what else to say. Frank showed up halfway through the event, wearing his old jacket and carrying a small box of diner pastries. "Figured people might get hungry," he said with a grin. Elena laughed through her tears. "You didn't have to do that." "Hey," he said. "You didn't have to make us all proud either, but you did." By the end of the evening, several people had asked if they could buy her drawings. She couldn't believe it. She'd never thought of selling them before. To her, they were just moments, little pieces of her life. But now, those pieces were finding new homes. When the event ended, she and Mara sat outside the gallery, sharing a leftover pastry from Frank's box. The street was quiet, the night air cool. "I can't believe that just happened," Elena said softly. "I can," Mara said. "You've worked for this without even knowing it." Elena leaned back, looking up at the stars. It still doesn't feel real. It's real, Mara said. You just have to let yourself enjoy it. Elena smiled, though her heart was still pounding. The next morning she was back at the diner before sunrise. The familiar smell of coffee filled the air, and the bell above the door chimed like always. But when she looked at the counter, it felt different now. She wasn't trapped behind it anymore. It was a place that had given her a story, and she was still writing it. Frank handed her the morning shift list and said, "Back to normal, huh?" She grinned. "If this is normal, I'll take it." Later that afternoon, the journalist who had written her first article stopped by again. He ordered coffee and pie and asked, "So, how's fame treating you?" Elena laughed. "Fame's a strong word. I'm still here, pouring coffee," he smiled. "That's what people like about you. You didn't change." "I'm still the same person," she said, "just with a few more frames on the wall." He nodded, pulling out his notebook. "Mind if I write a follow-up story?" "Only if you promise not to call me famous," she said, laughing. "Deal," he said. That evening, as she closed the diner, she took one last look around. The hum of the lights, the faint smell of grease, the laughter echoing from earlier. It all felt like part of her. When she got home, she checked her messages again. The gallery had sent her a thank you note, saying several visitors had asked when she'd have another show. They wanted her to consider a solo exhibition later in the year. Elena stared at the message for a long time. A solo show. Her work, just hers. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set her phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, just the soft glow of the street lamp spilling across the pavement. She thought about how far she had come from the girl who drew on napkins to pass the time. She remembered her mother's words again. You see the world different. Maybe that was true. Maybe that was her gift. She sat down at her table, pulled out her pencil, and began sketching the view outside her window. The lamppost, the faint outline of the diner sign in the distance, and the moon above it all. Her hand moved easily like it always did. The world outside faded away as the drawing came to life. When she finished, she wrote a small note at the bottom of the page. For those still waiting to be seen. Then she closed her sketchbook, smiling softly. The next morning, she brought the drawing to the diner and taped it up on the wall next to the others. Frank noticed it right away. "What's this one called?" he asked. Elena thought for a moment. "Hope," she said simply. He nodded. "Fits you," she smiled. "Maybe." As the door opened and new customers stepped in, Elena picked up her notepad, ready for another day. But now, each face she saw felt like a part of something bigger. A reminder that art wasn't just made in studios or galleries. It could live anywhere, even behind a diner counter, in the heart of someone who refused to stop seeing beauty in the everyday. And as she poured the first cup of coffee that morning, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the sketches on the wall. It felt like the world itself was smiling back at her. The world had started to feel wider for Elena, but it was also starting to feel a little heavier. With every kind message that came her way, a small voice inside her whispered, "What if you can't live up to it?" She had always been comfortable in the quiet, taking orders, refilling coffee, drawing in between rush hours. But now people expected something from her. The gallery wanted to feature more of her work. A local radio host wanted to interview her. Even a small online art magazine had reached out, asking if she would share her story. It all felt like a dream, and yet sometimes it was almost too much. One morning, while she was arranging muffins in the display case, Mara leaned over the counter and said, "You've been quiet lately. What's up?" Elena sighed softly. "It's nothing. Just everything. It's happening so fast. Good fast or scary fast?" "Both," Elena said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I love it, but it's like the world suddenly noticed me, and I don't know if I'm ready for that." Mara smiled kindly. "No one's ever really ready. You just figure it out as you go." Elena nodded, but her chest still felt tight. The next few days went by as usual, but something about the diner felt different. More people were coming in to see her art, to meet her. Some of the regulars joked that she'd be too famous to serve them soon. Others teased that they'd seen her name online more than the menu. Elena laughed along, but deep down the jokes made her uneasy. She didn't want anyone to think she was changing. She didn't want to lose the people who made her feel grounded. One evening, Frank found her sitting alone in the booth after closing. She had her sketchbook open, but her pencil wasn't moving. "Can't sleep again?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. She shook her head. "Just thinking." "That's dangerous," he joked softly, then looked at her face. "You okay?" She hesitated before answering. "I don't know. It feels like everything I wanted is starting to happen. But I keep wondering if I deserve it. I mean, I'm just a waitress who likes to draw." Frank leaned back and crossed his arms. "No, you're not just anything. You're someone who worked hard, who didn't give up. That's more than most people can say." "I don't want to disappoint anyone," she said quietly. He smiled. "You won't, and if you ever do, it's fine. You don't owe the world perfection, Elena. You just owe it honesty. That's what people love about your art. It's honest." She thought about his words long after he went home. The next week, the gallery invited her to attend a regional art event, a place where artists could meet, talk, and show their work. It was a big opportunity, but it meant missing several days at the diner. When she told Frank, she expected him to hesitate. Instead, he grinned and said, "You'd be crazy not to go. We'll manage here." "I don't want to leave you short-staffed," she said. He waved a hand. "Don't worry about me. Go make us proud." So she went. The event was held in a renovated warehouse filled with paintings, sculptures, and people who spoke passionately about art. Elena felt small at first, surrounded by professionals with fancy portfolios and business cards. She only had her simple sketches and a shy smile. But when people came by her small table, they didn't walk past. They stopped. They looked, and some even cried. One woman held up a sketch of a man sitting at a diner booth looking out the window. "This," she said, "this feels like my father. I haven't seen him in years." Elena's throat tightened. "Thank you," she said softly. Later that day, a man approached her table wearing a neat jacket and carrying a notebook. He introduced himself as an art curator from the city. "I've been following your work online," he said. "It's refreshing, real. I'd love to talk about featuring you in an upcoming exhibition." Elena blinked, barely believing it. "Me? I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." He smiled. "You don't have to be ready. Just willing." She promised to think about it, but her heart raced the entire way home. That night, she sat in her apartment staring at her sketchbook. The thought of leaving the diner even for a short while scared her. The diner wasn't just a job. It was part of her life, her identity. But deep down, she knew that she couldn't stay behind that counter forever. The next morning, she walked into the diner earlier than usual. The place was quiet, still waking up. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat on one of the stools. Frank came in a few minutes later. "You look like someone who's been thinking too much again." "I might be," she said, smiling faintly. He poured himself a cup too and leaned on the counter. "So what's going on?" She told him about the curator and the offer. He listened without interrupting, then said, "That's big, Elena, really big." "I know, but what if I'm not good enough for that kind of thing? What if I go and fail?" Frank took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Then you fail, and you come back. Simple as that. But you'll never know what you're capable of if you don't try." She looked down at her cup. "This place, it's been my whole world for so long." He smiled kindly. "And it'll still be here. But you've got to give yourself permission to grow. You've spent years serving everyone else's dreams, and maybe it's time to serve your own." His words hit her hard. She nodded slowly, feeling her chest tighten and loosen all at once. Over the next few days, she kept working as usual, but her mind was somewhere else. Every time she sketched, she imagined what it would be like to have her drawings hanging in a city gallery. The thought was thrilling and then terrifying. Mara noticed her drifting off one evening and nudged her playfully. "You're thinking about that big opportunity, aren't you?" Elena smiled shyly. "Maybe. You should do it," Mara said. "If you don't, you'll always wonder." That night, after her shift, Elena finally sat down and wrote an email to the curator. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she typed, "I'd love to be part of your exhibition. Thank you for believing in my work." Then she hit send. The days that followed felt surreal. The curator sent her details about the exhibition, dates, themes, logistics. It all sounded so professional, so far from her world of coffee cups and counter chatter. But the closer it got, the more her nerves grew. She stayed up late trying to create new pieces, each one meant to show a different side of her world. The regulars at the diner noticed how tired she looked, but also how alive her eyes seemed. "You've got that artist glow," one of them joked. "I think that's just lack of sleep," she said, laughing. On the day before she left for the city, the diner was unusually busy. Word had spread and everyone wanted to wish her luck. Some brought small gifts, sketchbooks, pencils, even a framed photo of the diner. Frank stood by the door at the end of the night, arms crossed, smiling proudly. "Look at all this," he said. "You built this community without even trying." "I'm going to miss it," she said quietly. "It'll miss you too," he replied. "But go, do your thing. We'll keep your spot warm." The next morning, Elena packed her sketchbooks, pencils, and a few framed drawings. As the bus pulled out of town, she looked back at the diner one last time, the small neon sign glowing faintly in the early light. The city felt huge when she arrived. Noise, lights, movement, and it was overwhelming. But when she stepped into the gallery, something inside her calmed. The white walls, the smell of fresh paint, the quiet hum of people setting up. It all felt like a new beginning. When the exhibition opened that evening, she stood by her section, nervous and excited. People wandered through, stopping to study her drawings, the diner, the faces, the stories. She overheard one man say, "There's so much heart in these." That was all she needed to hear. For the first time, Elena didn't feel like she was pretending. She felt like she belonged. When the event ended, she walked outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered around her, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She thought about all the years behind the counter, all the nights spent sketching in silence. Every moment had led her here. She smiled to herself and whispered, "I did it, Mama." Then she turned her face toward the stars, ready for whatever came next. Months had passed since the city exhibition, but for Elena it felt like a lifetime. Every morning still started with coffee, but now it was brewed in a small sunlit studio rather than the diner kitchen. Her life had shifted in quiet ways, like a door slowly opening to a wider world. The exhibition had been more successful than she ever dared to hope. A few of her sketches sold, and one piece, the one of the diner window with the late-night reflection, was chosen for a regional art magazine. But more than the recognition, what stayed with her was how people had reacted to her work. They didn't just see drawings. They saw memories, emotions, small moments that reminded them of their own lives. That was what she had always wanted. To show that even ordinary places, ordinary people had beauty in them. Still, she often thought about home. She missed the sound of plates clinking, the low hum of conversation, and Frank's familiar voice calling out orders. Her studio was peaceful, but sometimes too quiet. The city was beautiful, but it didn't smell like fresh coffee or rain on the diner roof. One morning, as she stood by the window of her studio, sunlight spilling across her sketchbooks, she decided to paint something different. Not just faces or moments, but a story. Her story. She began sketching the diner from memory. The chipped counter, the flickering neon sign, the booth where the truckers always sat, the coffee stains on napkins. Every detail came alive beneath her pencil. Then she started painting, soft colors at first, then deeper shades that brought warmth and light to the canvas. It took weeks. She worked late into the night, sometimes with music playing softly in the background, sometimes in complete silence. Every brush stroke felt like a step backward in time, back to the people who had believed in her before she believed in herself. When she finished, she stood back and looked at the painting. It wasn't just the diner, it was her heart on canvas. The piece captured the spirit of that place: laughter, struggle, comfort, and community. She titled it, "Home Between Shifts." A few days later, the gallery curator stopped by to check on her progress. When he saw the painting, he went quiet. After a long pause, he said, "This is special. It feels alive." Elena smiled softly. "It's where it all started." He nodded. "We're planning a new collection. Stories of people finding beauty in everyday life." This would be perfect. Her chest warmed at his words. But all she could think about was showing it to the people who had lived that story with her. That weekend, she packed up the painting and took the bus back to her hometown. As the familiar streets rolled into view, she felt a mix of nerves and nostalgia. The diner looked just the same flickering sign, the same smell of coffee drifting out the door. When she stepped inside, Frank looked up from behind the counter. For a moment, his face froze in surprise, then broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. "Well, look who's back," he said. "The famous artist returns," she laughed, hugging him tightly. "I miss this place." "You say that like it ever stopped missing you," he replied. Mara came rushing out from the kitchen, apron still on. "I told you she'd come back one day." The regulars turned and waved, calling out greetings. Someone shouted, "Hey, it's our superstar!" Elena blushed and smiled, her heart swelling at the warmth in the room. After a while, she brought in the painting she'd carried with her. She set it gently on the counter, leaning it against the wall. Everyone gathered around to see. Silence filled the room as they took it in. The painting showed the diner glowing under a golden sunset, each window reflecting light and life. Inside, the figures were familiar. Frank behind the counter, Mara laughing near the coffee pots, and a waitress sketching quietly by the register. Frank's voice broke the silence. "That's us," Elena nodded. "It's all of you. It's what made me who I am." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "That's beautiful, kid. You didn't just paint a picture. You painted our story." They decided to hang it right behind the counter where everyone could see it. The next morning, customers walked in and stopped to admire it. Some smiled, some took photos, and a few even teared up. Elena watched quietly from a booth, sipping her coffee. She didn't need applause or attention. Just seeing it there, in the place where everything began, was enough. After a few days back home, she found herself slipping into her old rhythm, helping out during rush hours, refilling coffee, laughing with the regulars. She didn't officially work there anymore, but she still felt like part of the team. One afternoon, as she wiped down a table, Frank said, "You know, you've come a long way." "What's next for you?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I'm not sure yet. Maybe more painting. Maybe teaching. I want to help others find what I found, that little piece of magic in everyday life." He smiled. "You'll do it. You've got the kind of heart that can see beauty anywhere." That evening she walked outside just as the sun dipped below the trees. The diner windows glowed warmly against the fading light. She pulled out her sketchbook, the same one she'd used years ago, and began drawing again. Her hand moved easily, the lines flowing without effort. This time she didn't draw to escape or to dream of a different life. She drew because she was happy. Weeks later, the gallery held another show featuring her new painting. This time Elena wasn't nervous. She stood confidently beside her work, talking with visitors, sharing stories about the diner and the people who had inspired her. A young woman approached her, holding a sketchbook in her hands. "I've been following your story," she said shyly. "I used to think art wasn't for people like me, but after seeing what you did, I started drawing again." Elena smiled warmly. "That's the best thing you could tell me. Keep going. You don't need permission to make something beautiful." That night, after the event ended, she walked home under the city lights. The air was cool and calm. She felt lighter than she had in years. When she reached her studio, she looked at the empty canvas waiting on her easel. Instead of feeling pressure, she felt peace. She sat down and began sketching the scene from memory. The diner glowing in the twilight, laughter spilling through the windows, and a waitress behind the counter, smiling softly at the world. In that moment, she realized that life wasn't about leaving things behind or chasing perfection. It was about carrying pieces of every place, every person, every small kindness, and turning them into something that could live forever through her art. The next morning, she got a message from Frank. It was a photo of the diner, packed with people, the painting shining brightly behind the counter. His message read, "Still inspiring us every day." Elena laughed softly, feeling tears sting her eyes. She typed back, "It'll always be home." Then she put her phone aside and looked out the window. The city below buzzed with life, strangers hurrying to work, buses rumbling by, sunlight bouncing off windows. Every person, every face felt like a story waiting to be told. She opened her sketchbook and started drawing again. Small, simple lines capturing the rhythm of everyday life. Hours passed, but she didn't notice. She was lost in the moment, her pencil moving with quiet joy. By the time she stopped, the sun had shifted and golden light filled the room. She smiled to herself, knowing this was only another beginning. Her life had changed, but in the most natural way. She wasn't chasing fame or success anymore. She was simply doing what she loved, seeing people, understanding them, and turning their moments into art. And though she still thought about the diner, she knew it would always be part of her, the place where she found her purpose, her courage, and her voice. As she looked at her new sketch, a crowded street full of laughter and light, she whispered to herself, "Behind every counter, behind every small life, there's something beautiful waiting to be seen," and she believed it, fully, deeply, like someone who had finally come home.